fer fram á ensku en hérna það verið sérst að streyma því þannig að bara þannig að fólk viti af því og yes, and I just want to welcome everybody who is going to talk here today. Welcome to Iceland. I'm very sorry about the weather. The summer didn't find Iceland this year, so but we have to do our best. The first speaker here today is Jakob. Very welcome, Jakob. And I think you have to put this on. Yes. Yeah, and we are streaming this to Vinnís partners who are, I don't know where they are, everywhere around Iceland. Yeah, and couldn't be here today. Yes. So, Jakob.
I'm going to speak a little about disruption of ergonomics in the classical sense, because my topic is to read some of the basics of the evaluation of hard manual handling and the prevention criteria. And I don't know if I will manage to go through all the slides. Some of them will be very brief. Hi, Backlund. It's a long time since I've seen her. Sorry. Yes, next one. You see, when it's slides like this, it takes a long time. But we have 7 or 8 questions to go through on heavy manual handling at work and prevention and musculoskeletal disorders and diseases as an outcome. Question 1 to 3, is it true that evaluation criteria are based upon approximately 2,500 newtons affecting the low spine? And the moment arm for determining these values, the internal load of the low back spine is estimated to be approximately 6 centimeters from the erector spinae center to the center of the spine. Yes, it is. And is it also true that this moment arm is far bigger than 6 centimeters in the Scandinavian Nordic population? Yes, it is. But we adapted this moment arm without any debate way back, just coming from the NIAS equation or the NIAS work. On the American population, they are smaller and have a lower moment arm. Say if the moment arm is instead of 7 centimeters, it's more likely that it is like that. It's a big percentile difference. You can see it's 9 to 10% in this example. And if a person is 80 kilos, 180 centimeters, is handling 30 kilos, it's like a difference in criteria to up to 10 centimeters. And it's also like the tolerance for compression, question 3, at the level in the low spine alters with age of the individual and is different between individuals. You see here the classical showing here that where is the tolerance level relative to age. This is the age of 40, this is age of 60. And you see the tolerance level for compression in the low back spine falls a lot. And we don't take that into account when we regulate. Maybe there's reasons for that, but we don't debate it very much. Yes, next. Oh, the other way. I'm awake. This is the original documentation about this discussion about the moment arm of erector spinae made by Gunnar Niemet and Olsen in Sweden. They had 21 patients with cancer, older people. At that time, it wasn't that easy to get CT scanning, so they had to use what they had. They had pictures from sick people in the 70s, and they found that the average moment arm was 6.8 centimeters, and these are people age 60, 70 with cancer, so it's not lower than that when you go to the normal population, I guess. But it hasn't been looked for after this so much. I couldn't find newer material. This is from 86, so it's pretty old. It's just to show that it's not out of the blue. I say that the moment arm is bigger than our calculations, and the authorities do it, and we have guidelines for doing it. Okay, next. Just a little appendix. What we're talking about is actually this moment arm from the center of the spine element, either the discus or the vertebrae. Here you have a weaker person, a smaller person. Here you have a stronger or bigger person with a bigger erector spinae. So the moment arm is getting bigger by, you can see it by visual contact to the slide here, that it is like that. So that's what we're actually talking about. I'm talking about. So we have a model, red, green, and yellow. You are familiar with that model, I guess. And this model sort of translates external forces when you're lifting something to internal forces in the spine. But the equation for doing that is sort of there's a reason to revisit what figures you put in that equation, I guess. Yeah, next. That's to show what we're talking about. You're using something like this model, maybe not this part of it, but is it true you use that in Iceland as well? Yeah, most of Scandinavia does. And this model is sort of translating external forces like I spoke about to internal forces in the low back spine. And actually what we are debating is, where is these lines going to be? Are they too high or too low compared to what the equation really tells us? The equation might be good enough, but the figures you put into the equation ought to be under debate or revisited. Okay. Say when you do mathematics on this, you can calculate different moment arms. The result from picking different moment arms here is 0.5, 0.6, 0.7. So you see the level of internal forces in the low back spine will sort of drop, of course, when the moment arm is bigger. And it's not just peanuts, it's actually something. And the reason why there's more difference up here than here, this is the lower part. The lower part shows the limit between green and yellow area, and this up here shows the limit between yellow and red area in the model of external forces. The reason why there's not so much difference here is, of course, that the body plays a bigger role, and that when you're getting the result is taken from two sources, the body and the load. When you're going deeper, it's another difference. Okay. And question 5, we are regulating all of manual handling on the basis of these low back spine figures. And the compression forces at the level of the low back spine only explains a fraction of the MSD related to heavy manual handling. The other elements contributes equally to this MSD for instance, shear forces in the spine. A new Danish article finds that heavy manual handling among luggage handlers leads to MSD, but not to disc vertebrae failure. It is Charlotte Brauer who's made that. And it's interesting in the sense that we have a regulation addressing the compression in the low back spine, but when you look at the actual staff in the airport in Copenhagen, 1,500 luggage handlers, you couldn't see the relation. But of course, it's a prevention strategy still. They had knees, they had arms and shoulders instead of low back spine. But we regulate on the basics of low back spine load. Kind of crazy. But we don't know better yet, maybe. Okay. I'm sorry it's too fast, but I have only 20 minutes. And another thing is that we, by using the same guideline model for all, try to treat all workers equal. But on the basics of that, of course, it's also that we introduce difference in risk level for different persons. Say you have a little lady and a big guy like me, same limit values or what you call it, and she's at a lot higher risk than I am. Why do you accept things like that? In Denmark, they say when you ask like that, they say it's to give equal opportunities on the labor market. Well, yes, thank you for hurting my back. And what I was briefly touching before, that we, by using this guideline, only target low back pain. Arm, elbow, shoulder, hips, knees are not addressed in a scientific way. Of course, it's a prevention strategy to introduce the limit values from here to the rest of the body, but it's not very scientific in the end. And altogether, we think the Danish guidelines are based on data of restricted value and relevance, because the basic data for this evaluation of the low back load is actually from the 60s. It's 70 years old or something like that. And it's made in a model, the same kind of model as IKEA use for testing their chairs. You have put forces onto a spine taken out of a dead body and see in micro fractures in the structure to see what happens in this low back. It's not a very vivid model. It's not made in real life. It's based on assumptions and shortcuts. So we try to convince the National Research Center on Occupational Health and Safety to look into this and try to give it a more fundamental overview and maybe a new start. Not that they should do it alone, but they could do it along with their European partners. And they say it's very difficult. And I say, you're the professors, so come on. Aren't you supposed to do difficult things? No, I know it's difficult. I've been there myself. Some years ago, the politicians in Denmark forced a job on the National Research Center to give it an academic overview of the basics of the documentation level. And they said their conclusion was there's a substantial lack of knowledge on dose-effect relationship, exposure to heavy lifting, and the supposed outcome in musculoskeletal disorders and diseases. And hence also the prevention factors we sort of introduced to the jobs we are looking at. This paper has if you know the exact title, you can find it on the internet. But if you just Google it, you'll never find it. They hide it away in the back of their homepage because they don't want to discuss it, because it's politically inconvenient to look at things like that. But it's still there. You can find it, and it's said that our prevention strategies needs a thorough makeover, and it's what. Question 10 is it true that in Denmark this white paper is hidden away. Nobody talks about it in the ministry. Nobody acts upon it in the occupational health and safety authorities. And the guys who made it are sacked and out of the research institution, not because of this paper, but they were sort of not content with the fact that nobody did something about it. It sounds dramatic, but it is rather dramatic, actually. But we're not alone with that. There was a Dutch European project looking into the same level of documentation in this area, and they came up with the same results. And still, nobody wants to open this question in the European Union. The act on heavy manual handling is sort of, no, we don't want to touch it. They know it's fragile and requires a lot of research and new strategies, maybe, and something they don't like, that you may have to introduce different risk levels to different person groups, especially the older people. You know, we have regulation addressing the young ones, half the load if you're not more than 18. What about the nurses 60 years old going to handle persons in the hospital or on the elder care home or other heavy manual handling? They could use it just as well, or maybe even more. This is just, I think we will just leave it in a moment, but it's just to show that this system has been used to build a huge house on top of nothing. In Denmark, we have regulation on, it's not used, but you can find it on the Occupational Health and Safety Authorities homepage, which says that if you're going to be home safe, you can not lift more than 48 lifts a day as a worker in the building industry. Well, goodbye and good weekend. Monday at 12. It doesn't work. Okay. When it comes to the regulation is sort of equal to the prevention strategies. Hope you agree that the prevention strategies are sort of written down in the legislation. But when you do the legislation, it's very important to look upon how the risk factors actually occurring. This here is a risk for dust. More dust makes it more dangerous. More noise makes it more dangerous. But a lot of occupational a lot of factors on musculoskeletal diseases is not an S curve. It's like a U-form curve. The risk is high when you don't do anything, and it's also high when you do too much. That doesn't go for everything in musculoskeletal disorders, of course, but for a lot of it. And the regulation, at least in Denmark, is based upon looking upon musculoskeletal diseases from that dosage response relationship and not this one. It's like more of a thing is really bad. It's not like that. You should have a load in your work, and probably also a lot of it, but not too much, of course. And also, it's not reflected in the legislation around in the Nordic countries and Scandinavia. Okay. When you look upon it another way, there's also a question of, don't we have positive factors? You saw the U-shaped risk assessment curve. So it means that what I argue for is that you have the way NIAS look upon it, that say it's 50 kilos being the heaviest load you can lift. It's not important, but let's take that example. You have a lot of factors which reduces this maximum load in the situation in the yellow area. It's a horizontal multiplier, it's a vertical multiplier, distance multiplier, asymmetric multiplier, all the things which makes lifting worse, so to speak. But isn't it so that there's positive factors if the risk assessment curve is actually U-formed? Example to put new additional factors on is load relative to maximum voluntary contraction force, or say it in another way, anthropometric data multiplier. If you're a big person, you can tolerate more. If you're a little person, not very strong, you can tolerate very little. 3 times more. You could also argue for an age multiplier. Young one having a high multiplier factor. Yeah, shift. Example, 50 kilos with the old NIAS regulation, which is no negative factors. 20.7 kilo is maximum in the given situation. But if you introduce, say, positive factors, they are bigger than 1, of course, for anthropometric status data, and for age, it's instead of 20.7 kilo, it's 29.8 kilos. This is taken out of the blue air, but these factors, they are maybe not that big, but they are there. So you see there's a big difference. Okay. Let's just jump it over. You'll get the slides afterwards, and also can contact me. We have a situation in the Danish population, probably also in your countries, that the basic data of what you can tolerate are sort of shifting. It's natural. It is like the maximum uptake of oxygen is dropping. The level of what you can achieve is like a sort of Swedish study where it showed that the Danish high school girls had the same level of 62-year-old Swedish ladies. So it's dropping. Also muscle strength is dropping dramatically, 30% in some muscle groups for the last 50 years. It's because people are sitting inside doing things at the computer, not climbing the trees or the mountains. And this also alters the result in the equation. The functional capacity is dropping at the moment in certain groups. It's not like the average is altering that much. Only one. Okay. It's not that this is altering very much, but the sort of the normal distribution is broadening out. The weak ones get weaker, and the strong one in the workout centers are getting stronger and more fit. So you have a much more diverse population at workplaces. And you don't take into account that the weak ones are getting weaker. And also at the conclusion, there's no debate. We don't see any changes. We have the same evaluation criteria as we had 20, 50, 40 years ago, almost. Last one, I guess, hope. Yeah, it's just to show that the papers are full of this drop in functional capacity, and this here shows that the oxygen uptake has dropped in 20 years from this level to this level here. 10 in sort of what do you call it, kondital in Danish? What is that? And help me. It's the maximum oxygen uptake. I don't know the name. There's a figure you can measure it by. I don't know. I don't remember the English name right now. Aerob capacity is the scientific name of it. Okay. This is just to discuss this age thing. Ilmarinen made this. This is the curve when you try to keep on your functional capacity, and this is when you do nothing. So there's a great possibility of keeping up with your functional capacity, but there's also a good deal you can't do anything about. So we don't address people getting elder, and we're on top of that want them to stay longer, at least in Denmark. I think it's the same. My kids are expecting pension at 72 or something like that. Yeah. So doesn't it leave us with, I'm not the scientist, I'm not coming with the answers, I'm coming with the questions. As many of you are also practitioners, you might have the same questions and say, why don't you jump into it and try to make an overview of what is necessary to get done? Okay. We need a service check on the data platform. They are 60, 70 years old, made from dead bodies. forensic ergonomics. We need to check on the guidelines. We need to check on prevention strategies. But how does we make it fly? It seems that nobody really listened to these questions. I'm not the only one putting them forward. So that was a negative address opening.
So while Ingrid maybe will get ready, are there any questions for Jakob? We can use this then.
Hello, I'm Stephen Legg from New Zealand. I used to work in musculoskeletal physiology many years ago, and when these guidelines were first developed, the ones you've described, they're primarily almost exclusively based, the NIOSH ones, on biomechanical risk factors. In the 1980s and 90s, there was a lot of work which went on physiological limitations in repetitive lifting. And there was a lot of work conducted by Stover Snook in the 1980s on psychosocial limits, all of which should have been integrated into guidelines. They seem to be entirely based on biomechanical factors. Why have all of the physiological and the psychophysical approaches been ignored? Perhaps we should relook at those and integrate them into the guidelines, because there's a lot of information there already.
I agree with you, Stephen. Of course, you're right. Some of it is already sort of included in terms of what is the acceptable level of lifting for the population in the US, and also the maximum aerobic capacity is also addressed, even if it's like. But I stand back with the feeling, not stand back. I'm standing here with the feeling that we should not be so harsh on the single heavy lifting. We should more look at repeated lifting of heavier burdens, the total lifting amount over the day or the week or the job week. Most people can tolerate to lift 55 kilos once, two, 3 times a day, but it's the sum of it which is the problem. But also what I addressed here. And these psychosocial factors, I don't know about social partners in Denmark on the legislation. The employers and employees are not very keen about debating them. So the scientists have to bring them in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will now take 20 minutes to demonstrate a tool we call SARA, and it's me, Ingrid Svensson, and Ulla Holmgren. We work together in a small company called OHS Arbetsmiljö, Health and Safety Arbetsmiljö in Swedish English, something like that. And we are both occupational health engineers, and I'm also an ergonomist. So we try to work together to see the whole thing about work and environment in a broader perspective. So, okay, Ulla, will you start?
Yes. You get the first picture. Okay, yeah, we'll speak up. Yeah. Just figuring out how the pictures will get on here. We have the pictures there, but not.
It's not the same picture anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's start here. Okay, we have this SARA system that is an accumulated risk assessment system, and it's built up on the basic information system with green, yellow, or red. And SARA is a tool for independent risk assessments for the shop floor level. It's for the users. Everyone should see what the situation is like. And it's also a tool that's following the lean concept. So it's easy to work with, and it's an effective method. It's very systematic. It gives the guidance, so you follow a certain method all the way through, and no matter who is doing it, you get a similar result. You not sort of drift off an awful lot. You have something to follow, so you can move on. It's also very important because it moves the ownership for who's responsible for the work environment to the line management. So it's very obvious for the supervisors and for their managers that it's our problems. It removes the problem to be it's for the professional occupational health and safety people. It's not their problem, it's the organization's problem. They own it. And that also includes that the result of SARA, it gives a good order. It's a quality in how it's performed, the risk assessment. You identify the risks available. You also have continuous improvements because you can see what the situation is like in green, yellow, or red. And then, of course, you can improve it. You don't want to be red. And you can easily say, we want to reduce a number of reds with 50% or 10% or whatever. But you can see how it actually improves. And that is also a very effective tool then for KPIs. I don't know if you're familiar with the wording, but it's very common within big companies that you have KPIs, what you are supposed to achieve. That every manager, every supervisor get a figure. This is what I expect you to do during this year or during this 6-month period. And this is a very effective way to do it. It's cost effective, health and safety work, because the organization is learning while it's doing. Because it's a big system, it covers several areas. It's noise, illumination, physical factors, chemical hazards, accident risks, safety of machinery, ergonomics, and we also have organizational and social work environment included in it. So it's a very broad system. And as you're working with it, you learn more and more because it's a guidance in it. And it's very visual, and that is the whole point. When it started this, the development of the system, it was because of it was lacking systems on showing everyone what is the situation like on this workplace. I was a health and safety engineer or occupational health and safety engineer in Saab automotive industry in Sweden. And at every station there was, have you measured the noise? Oh yes, we have. So where is the results? I don't know. Have you checked the ergonomics? Yes, we have. What's it like? Well, have you measured the dust? Oh yes, we have. What's the result? We don't know. Where is it? We don't know. So actually to get all of the information at the same place for what's valid on this workplace, that's the key issue. So this is the result. When you've done a SARA assessment, you actually post it on the workplace. You have all the subjects here. You got colors, and you got information on how to work, what to do, what's the risk. And you also have what instructions you especially need if you have like demands for personal protective equipment. Okay, we move on. As time moved on, we saw that was a need for many areas to have the SARA system. So as it is, we have a version, SARA Basic, that's for basically permanent workplaces, manufacturing industry as the prime target. We have SARA Office environments. That is the conference rooms, it's what you call it, community areas, canteens, social areas, but also it includes the personal workplaces and the personal social situation for the employees is included in that one. We have SARA material handling, because in a lot of places it's not like it's one single workplace. It moves around. You do a lot of different things. So it works for delivery areas and driving on forklift trucks and handling a lot of materials. And we also have this one starts to slide, SARA maintenance, because maintenance work is very different. It could be anything. So there we have a lot of checklists and special things we go through to actually do to check the safety for maintenance works. So that's the systems. The design of SARA, it is in an Excel workbook, all of it. That also means that it's good for the IT solution. IT departments don't have to worry about firewalls or anything. So it's in an Excel file that the company gets and owns. And it's objective questions that you go through and you answer and follow up. And you have keywords actually to give guidance about what is the right answer, what to think of. And you identify and highlight the risks in the SARA. Okay, we move on. Something happened again. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we actually have one module that is for translation into any language. So it's got English as a base language, and then you have areas you can fill in with Chinese or Thai or whatever, or Danish. Yeah, it actually works, but I don't know what's happened here. Okay, any other thoughts? Oh, here we go. So this is the summary page then. This is the result of SARA. You go through the SARA, you do one tab at a time, one subject, noise, illumination, and physical factors. But when you're done, this is the result. This is what you get out in the workstation. And then is the color coding, green, yellow, or red. I think we all have a sort of an instinct of what those colors means. And then we have, well, the color coding is that red. That's top priority. That's what you need to start with. That is the most important thing. You do that first. That's a considerable or unacceptable risk. You need to either do an in-depth risk assessment immediately or to put actions into place promptly. So it's It's now, it's important. Yellow has a more moderate risk. It needs to be taken actions to, but you need to do something over time. You could also need to do a deeper assessment about what the problem is, a risk assessment there. And then 3, green, that's a marginal to exceptional risk. Acceptable, sorry, not an exception. You don't need to do any action. It's not free from risks, that doesn't exist, but you don't need to do anything. Okay. Is it jammed again? Yeah, okay. You see, we have 2 columns. We have workplace and we have operator. And that means that it could be different colors on those 2. And if you have workplace red, you can have operator yellow. And that sounds a bit weird. But the thing is, there's something wrong at the workplace, and you do something for the operator that improves the situation. It could be training, it could be some sort of, well, you could do something that improves the risk. It's still a risk. It's not green, but it's better, it's yellow. Or you can have it yellow and green, or you can have red and green, or green and green. So the idea is that to start with, this one should be green. The whole of the operator situation should be green as the result. The long-term result is, of course, that also the station should be green. You agree? Shouldn't be any risks. But until then, we work with the operator and improve that one. And then, in order to get the operator green, it quite often could be a case like personal protective equipment or something like that. Okay. We can have an example here. It's a high noise. And you have, I don't know if you're all familiar with the hierarchy of the controls, how to actually address when there are problems. So it's high noise. We can build or change the station. We can remove the noise. Okay, then it's green on the station. It's green on the operator. We can separate the person from the noise. Okay, there is still noise, but the operator is green. Use safety devices. I'm not aware about any safety devices that actually could work for this to remove the noise. You can train and inform, as this comes a bit down on the ladder on how to improve the safety, but by telling someone this is noisy, it won't help. The hearing will be just as damaged, so it's still red, both on the workplace and on the operator. You can use personal protective equipment now, immediately. Then it's red on the station, but it's not a problem for the operator at the moment. Warning signs, sounds, lights. It won't do it. It won't do the trick, will it? It's still red on the operator. Okay, move on. This is what an empty form looks like before anything is started. And this is the Excel form. We have all the tabs displaying here: noise, illumination, physical risks, and so on. We can move on. Here is an example of what it could look like. Here is the noise tab. We have filled in, after following the questions, we actually ask you and you have to think. The whole idea is this is done by non-experts. This is done by the people on the floor, operators and supervisors. They are trained in doing SARA, but they aren't professionals in occupational health. So they get the questions, They fill in the answers. And then at the end here, in this box, they fill in why it's not green. You can see here there were 2 yellows and 1 red. And they put in what's wrong. Why isn't it green? So the highest color wins. 1 red makes a red workplace. Nothing can remove that, but an action that actually that would be a countermeasure. And this, of course, expert evaluations, because this is done by amateurs. And then if someone had done a measurement, an occupational health and safety engineer has been out there and doing a measurement, saying that this is not loud, okay, then it's not a problem. That overrules. Okay. There is also well, this is one way to do the assessments, that we have the questions you fill in, and the colors are already given depending on if it's yes, sometimes, or no. You get the results. Yeah, and we also have another method, and then you have to, when you say this is a problem, then you have to decide in a matrix, is it unlikely, likely, or what is the severity, to actually come up with a color yourself from this matrix. So it's not so simple as we can give you the answer from the beginning. So for risk assessments of accidents, we have this type of method. We have the questions. You come up with, when handling welded sheets, when the robot isn't working, then it's risks of burns in this case. Okay, and then you find out what you can do about it and how you reckon the risk will be afterwards. Sorry. So you have to actually make sure that this is an effective method. You could end up with red anyhow you tried, but not even. So you go through all this one, and actually in the same way, you end up with a color at the bottom. You can move on, I think, or yeah, this one, yeah. And in the end then, it might be that you actually have found out that you need to use hearing protections, you need to cut-resistant gloves or whatever. And then we have a special tab for these symbols. You write what you need to use in the countermeasures, and then you actually just copy them and put them in the front page in these boxes. So that's done manually. Otherwise, the comment boxes and those colors given on each and every tab will be moved automatically to the front page. So you will actually get a page that you post at the workstation out there that actually can give a lot of information. And I had a conversation with a major client the other day, and there had been a bit of an epiphany amongst his one of the plants who was using it, and said, well, this is a cultural tool. It changes the attitude, because actually people learn and everyone on the floor knows what it is. So they realize this is not 2 people walking around the shop floor doing risk assessments. It's something everyone knows what it is, and it's part of doing. And of course, to change over time, you need to actually follow up all the actions you find, because you will find a lot and you need to address it and to make sure actions are taken. Are we Okay.
Thank you for this. Are there any questions or comments?
Yes, hello, I'm Kirsten Olsen from New Zealand, and I just have a question. I was wondering, you said that there was this workstation and the job or the person, and I was wondering, is it the workstation the tools assess, or does it actually assess the job the person has? Because if the person has working at more than one station, does it then assess, for example, the noise level that the person is exposed to during the 8 hours, or is it just a workstation?
Okay, it is the workstation, so so it doesn't follow a person. Everything is about the station.
One more question.
Say it's an expert opinion about it is needed. It could be an example, electromagnetic radiation or fields. Do they call the engineer, or do they try to evaluate themselves?
Well, electromagnetic fields are addressed in this, so they will actually pick it up, but surely they will need help to sort it out, because that one is complicated.
Thank you. Are you ready? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
And I hope this one works, because I like to move around and I like to be in control. Okay, thank you everybody for coming to the meeting and making it enjoyable to come to New Zealand. I come all the way from, no, not to New Zealand, to Iceland. Sorry, I come all the way from New Zealand. I do, and I was supposed to go to the conference, and I booked my tickets long time ago, and couldn't change anything. So I'm very pleased that you could make this meeting. So I also had an opportunity to talk about what I'm working with. Well, what I'm going to talk about is moving and handling people guidelines. So it relates pretty much to what Jakob was talking about. I'm just in a different position, because my question is, what makes these guidelines work if you have them, or make them maybe not work? And I'm presenting results from a project that I did with Mark Lidegaard and Professor Stephen Legg. And Mark Lidegaard is a PhD student that has done most of the work, but I've been his supervisor and also been doing the work. So let's get on with this stuff, and it works good. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background for what the problem is, what the guidelines are, and what the aim of the study was. And then I will present what we actually found, and I'll make a conclusion, and then there hopefully will be time for you to have some questions. Okay, the problem. Well, we have high prevalence of musculoskeletal injuries related to moving and handling people. And in New Zealand, on average, and in New Zealand we have around 4.5 million citizens. So that's just to give an idea about how many it is. So on average, we have injuries related to moving and handling people around 3,301 per year. And it's related to how many we have in the healthcare system. In all, it's 9,800. So it's around a third that is related to moving and handling people. And that's we found that out by using statistics from the Accident Compensation Corporation. So it's accepted claims from 2000. Oh, sorry. that should be this one maybe. Yeah, from 2005 to 2016. So we looked at all of them, and Mark, he went through every single injury and read the description so we could identify whether it was related to moving and handling people or not. So that was a lot of work that went into that. And we also found that the average cost per year, and I've tried to translate it into Icelandic kroner here. Oh, that was, here was it was. So it's around 464 million Icelandic kroner a year that these injuries cost. It's 6 million New Zealand dollars. So now you can convert them into, you have the exchange rate here. So it's quite a big burden. I must say, before the guidelines were made in New Zealand, they actually didn't have these numbers at all. So they just presumed that the burden was as big as it was anywhere else in the world. You know, lots of people think, well, we have a big burden and we can see people getting injured and it is a big problem, but we haven't actually measured it. Okay, so that was actually a problem. But when we then look at interventions, then in New Zealand, the healthcare organizations in New Zealand, and also the previous moving and handling guidelines on, that were published in 2003, they focused on technique and training. So that was mainly focused on how do we actually do these things, and how do you move, and how do you lift, and how do you train people. And what we know is that if we just focus on a single intervention like training and technique, it doesn't work. So it does not reduce risk that is related to moving and handling people, and it does not result in fewer injuries. So we need a different approach. And the Accident Compensation Corporation realized that. So in 2012, they launched a new guideline which advised to implement a multifaceted program, so with several components. And the components should be that you should have policy. You should have a policy for actually what you want to do and how you are treating, moving, and handling people. You should have a good plan. You should evaluate what you are actually doing, and you should audit it. So that is like a basis. And then you need to have risk assessment. So you need to assess the patients when they come in, and you need to assess the environment and the person that is lifting and all that kind of stuff. You need to look at your facilities. So you need to have guidelines for how should they be, how much space do we need to actually be able to use equipment. And so that comes the equipment. What equipment do you need? And of course, you also need the training and techniques, both in actually moving and handling, but also in using equipment and what kind of facilities you need. So that's the whole package needs to be implemented. And that was what the guideline was about. And that is a guideline we have looked at whether it works or not. So the aim of the study was to first identify how the people that developed the guideline actually thought it should work to reduce injuries, because that is actually the main thing. And that's what we call the program theory, or other people call it program logic. And then we wanted to assess who the guidelines have reached and whether they have actually read it and used it. Have they? So does it actually reach the people you want to reach? If it doesn't, then you can forget about it. And then we wanted to identify, okay, if it reached people, for whom does it really work, or does it not work? Or under which circumstances does it work? Because that's maybe the main thing. It might work for some people and not for others because they are in different situations. Okay, so what did we do? Well, it's going to be very brief. To identify the program theory, we interviewed the people that have actually developed the guidelines, and we looked at the guidelines and on documents that were used to justify the guidelines and to say what do we need in relation with the guidelines to make them work. To identify the reach and the uptake, we developed a questionnaire. So we surveyed the intended users, and we used the same channels that the Accident Compensation Corporation had used to distribute the guidelines. And we contacted some, it was through third parties, so it was trade unions and it was physiotherapists and so on, organizations we tried to send out to their members, and also health and safety managers in the healthcare sector that we had addresses to. It's difficult to distribute into some that you don't have addresses to. It was distributed by email and it was an online questionnaire. To identify for whom it worked and why, we did 2 case studies, and we only looked at hospitals, but I actually go into that a little bit more. We interviewed people in the hospitals. We did a clinical workshops where we gathered people together and asked them about what they have introduced in the hospital the last 10 years. And then they identify what the problems have been and what has facilitated and so on. So that was a 4-hour workshop we did with people in each of the hospitals, and we did a bit of document analysis. Okay, so how should these guidelines actually work? So now we're into the program theory. We have the guidelines over there, and they should be introduced into the organization. Okay, so we want to reach the users, and what we found was that in the guidelines there's actually written that all in the healthcare sector, all the people that are actually involved with moving and handling should know the guidelines or the content of the guidelines. But if we go a bit more into how the guidelines are written, and from the interviews, it was clear that it was meant to be used by occupational health and safety managers or by moving and handling people coordinators, because they are the people that are committed to health and safety and to moving and handling. So they were the ones that were bringing it into the organization. And it was distributed by mail and at a conference where they launched the guidelines, and via the internet. And just to say, there's actually 3 different versions. There's a hard copy, there's a CD-ROM, and there's an internet version that you can access. Okay, so the user should then decide to use all these elements of the guidelines which I showed earlier. So they should read them, decide to read, and then they should decide to use them. And the reasons why they should use all these things, were the arguments in the guidelines are both, well, I'll maybe start with the ethical ones, because they are that it will reduce injuries. If you implement the whole guideline, it will reduce injuries. Then they also argue that it will reduce costs related to injuries and sick leaves, or for the ethical arguments, they also argued that it would improve quality of care. And they also said that it would be cost effective. And there was also a legal argument, because the guideline is created so it fits with the legislation in New Zealand, which is based on risk assessment, which is not different from any other legislation in the Nordic countries. Okay, so if you use the policy and culture part, then you make a foundation for change. That was the idea. And you assess the risk, so you have identified the risk, and you have also identified how to control the risk. You use the facilities sections to make sure you have facilities that accommodate equipment and techniques you need to use. And you use the equipment section to find out which equipment is suitable, and you need to make it have so much that it's available. So that should be the result of the use of that section. For the training technique, you make sure that you have safe techniques, which is also related to the facilities and equipment. And when you train people in the facilities and the equipment and the movements and so on, then people have the knowledge and ability. And to get all that implemented, they realized you need, of course, management support. And that's what is written in these documents here, that you need to make sure management is supportive, and also that you have a participatory approach, so you include people in the workplace to evaluate policies and so on, so that you have engagement and commitment. So when you have all this, it's easy, safe, moving and handling people in practice, and of course, reduced injuries. So that's good. Then they also identified what the needs for the guidelines were. So that's the context it's all implemented in. And they say, well, aging workforce, you have heard some of the things that Jakob has just talked about, that you have an aging population, so you really need to do something about all these things. You have heavier clients. So it's really important that you just don't go and lift, but you have all these things in place. And of course, the needs should help to make the organization design to use the guidelines. They also identified that you have a good health and safety legislation, and aligning it with the health and safety legislation should help implement it. The Accident Compensation Corporation have other programs. They have a No Faults program. They had a program called Discomfort, Pain and Injury. That was a general program that looked at discomfort, pain and injuries and how to prevent it. And the guidelines were also aligned with these things. So they have tried to make sure that they aligned the things with the guidelines with other programs that could facilitate the implementation. And they saw the public sectors as drivers for change. So they mainly made the guidelines fitting the public sector. That might have been a downfall, but that was how they thought. They had also seen that there's a lot of barriers, and lots of the arguments they use in guidelines is to try and help to overcome these barriers, that we have increased health cost, health budget constraints, existing building regulation, and facility guidelines. This was a particular problem they saw because these guidelines does not demand enough space for use of equipment. So they also make sure that it was explained in the guidelines that they need more space. The healthcare sector, they saw, was focused on patient safety, not on staff safety, which also could be a problem. Then the healthcare sector is really diverse. You know, you have aged care, you have hospitals, you have private hospitals, you have general practitioners, and so on. So it's really a diverse home care where you don't have the same opportunities and so on. So what we found up here, that the public sector was seen as a driver, might be difficult to put together with this one. And then a problem was that the Ministry of Health were not engaged in the development of the guidelines, and they couldn't get anybody from the Ministry of Health to participate. But we also have some internal factors that they already knew about, that these ones were what should facilitate organization to decide to use the guidelines, that you have high cost of moving and handling people injuries and high staff turnover. You have existing health and safety programs which should help. And you also, if you have a supportive management, that should help too. But that's an if. And the internal barriers is that you it costs money to implement the program. They rely on training, as I said earlier. You could have unsupportive management. And what they identified was that you have a lot of resistance towards change, and people have very strong views of moving and handling people. So it might not be that easy. So this was all the things they have thought about, and we found in their guidelines. So what did we find? In the questionnaire, we found that here you see the different roles we identified that we sent the questionnaire to. Here we ask about if they are aware of the guidelines, and here we ask about whether they have access to them, whether they have read them, and whether they have used them. And it is a kind of, if you are not aware, you are not asked whether you have access to them, because that's 3 minutes. Okay, I have to quick up. So I will then continue and say, well, what we found was that it reached most of these people here, which were the main target group. They were most aware. They are more than 80% aware of it. And they also, if you first were aware of it, then there are more people actually using it, reading it and using it. So they are the ones that have used it most. Whereas nurses and the carers were not that much aware. But if they were aware, then a higher percentage has access to it and also have used it, except from down here, the nursing students. Okay, we have two case studies, a small private hospital and a large public hospital. The small private hospitals were able to deselect high-risk patients and use knowledge from large hospitals and use national health and safety managers. The public hospital takes all patients, and they are quite bureaucratic, and they're influenced by the Ministry of Health goals, which is limited, and particularly about the budget. Okay, what was the motivational for implementing moving and handling components? Well, it was all that they have actually experienced injuries and absenteeism. They had cost of injuries and absenteeism, and the new legislation actually helped implement it. We have a new legislation implemented in 2016, which have a focus on the management liability. And what was common for both of them was also that the program was implemented gradually and perceived to have reduced injuries. Okay. Common characteristics: it was driven by the health and safety managers and a part-time moving and handling coordinator. They spent considerable time seeking support for implementation, and if it lacked, it was difficult to influence. It influenced staff, and it was difficult to implement the components in the. And it also had a lot of resistance to change. Okay. Again, we had a focus on patient instead of staff. Doctors and surgeons were not, well, they were kind of barriers because they were focused on patients too, and resistance from architects and engineers in relation to, oh, somebody knows about that. Oh, I heard that. And there was also a high workload, which was a barrier. Okay, I think I'll maybe go over these things. But there were some opportunities that actually help implement these guidelines, and it was when they had opportunities to actually exchange experience by training days where trainers or health and safety representatives could come together, and also when you had a cross, for example, between health and safety committees and the moving and handling coordinator, and they use the guidelines to support their arguments as a checklist to evaluate their programs. And when they managed to be involved in facility change, and I say when they managed because it was actually a battle to be involved there, then they also use the guidelines to make sure that they got better facilities. Okay, now I'll just put all these things on because this is the one I showed you before. So I won't spend so much time. So this actually shows you that what worked in their program theory. Well, it was these people that were reached that actually decided to read them. What the problem was here was that they mainly used the risk assessment, equipment training, and techniques. There was not the facilities and the policies were not that much read. And they had difficulties gaining support from management, so they had to influence a lot of people in the organization. So they had difficulties establishing the foundation for change. They had difficulties establishing facilities that accommodated equipment and techniques. And the ones that they have most difficulties convincing management to do something about was to get enough equipment and enough. So that was a lot of discussion about what is enough and how do we make it available in the wards and so on. And so the problem was that when you have this lack of these things, then you don't really get the safe patient handling practice, and you don't really get the reduction. And when I showed you the main figures on the injury rates, then it was across both before and after the guidelines was implemented. So we haven't seen a decline in injuries. These hospitals might say that they have reduced injuries. We didn't see the evidence for it. So it's their perception. And the reason for that it doesn't work is that you still have this reliance on training, unsupportive management, resistance to change. These were the facilitators, yes. And you had this increased health budgets, or increased cost and budget constraints, which they thought could be a facilitator, was a hindrance. And down here you had the same. These were actually active. So the problem is that we have more barriers than we have facilitators, and that's why it doesn't work. So my last thing, no, that was not my last thing. But this is that these people needed support from outside. They were isolated. This is my last thing. What can Iceland learn from this? Any questions?
Hi, thank you, Mossa. Hi. Hi, my name is Osk. I work at the CEO office at the University Hospital, and I'm curious about the group you chose to implement, the doctors and the surgeons, as opposed to nursing managers or others. What was the reason for that?
Well, no, the things with the doctors and surgeons was that when the health and safety managers or the moving and handling coordinator, they tried to implement it, what they found was that they had a lot of resistance from the doctors and the surgeons, because they insisted that they used specific techniques in the operation theaters, so they didn't accept them to use hover mats. So what the strategy from the health and safety or the moving and handling coordinators and people working there was that you have to be so efficient in using the mat so that they don't have the opportunity to say that you're not allowed to. So you have to be so they try to get around them, but they are very powerful. So if you don't have the powerful people on your side, and what they require is often that they want the scientific evidence, case control studies to show that the hover mat works better and it actually prevents people from getting their injuries, which you can't find because it doesn't exist. To the kind of evidence they want, because they are used to these controlled trials with medicine and so on. So yeah, so it was not that we focused on them, but that was the barrier. Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Okay, thank you very much, Kirsten. And now we have a short coffee break, and we'll be back here.
Okay, all right, I'll just start then. All right, so I'm Linda Rolfö. I'm from the ergonomics department at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. And besides working and conducting research on activity-based flexible offices, I yeah, I enjoy traveling. So thank you very much for letting me be here and have a look at Iceland. It's fantastic. I've been here for 4 days, so it's really, really nice. Okay. So I have a master's degree in industrial design engineering, and now I'm a PhD student. Oops. I'm a PhD student and started off in the project planning new facilities, which was financed by Offa Insurance. And Jörgen Eklund was the project leader. Perhaps some of you know him. Now the project included 3 types of facilities. It was industries, it was offices and healthcare. But I will focus on offices and especially activity-based offices. So first I will go through a little bit background about the activity-based flexible office and a definition about it, and then I will I will compare some underlying factors for office preference. So what is the activity-based flexible office, or the ABW, the flex office, hot desking, active seating, many names, but I will refer to the AFO, activity-based flexible office. And the AFO is defined partially by its hot desking or clean desking policies, which means that employees apply, they have no assigned desks. Secondly, in difference from just active seating, they are also designed for different activities. So the design defines the office. So it has different areas for different activities, like concentrative work or interactive work. And it usually have backup spaces and different zoning. And the AFOs are controversial, at least in Sweden. And some believe in the concept, while some don't. Now, I'd like to ask you, how many of you would like to sit in an AFO? Yes? Some of you, and some absolutely not. As I say, they're controversial. Now, why would you implement an AFO? Do you have any ideas of why organizations? Huh? Because you're broke. For economical reasons. Okay. Okay, so improve utilization of office space. Yes. Poverty. Okay. Other reasons? To increase interaction. Improve interaction, yes. Well, there are actually, If you need interaction, that's right. So there are many reasons put forward. For example, facilitate interaction, as you said, stimulate creativity through interaction, increase flexibility, and reduce cost, as you mentioned, but also to increase productivity and decrease environmental impact, attract personnel, and perhaps follow the trend and gain a positive image towards external clients. Well, there are several reasons why we should study AFOs. Like this. Sometimes after lunch, you have to go 4 laps and just pick a spot in the middle of a team that you know speaks a lot, because there are no desks available. I cannot choose. So this is a problem occurring in AFOs. And there's often media or friends reporting on problems in AFOs, like, yeah, it's stressing not to know where to sit in the morning. So this is kind of bad. But it can get even worse. Support has decreased since everyone is isolating themselves. It's an unexpected effect of this environment, whereby more people want to protect themselves, more who are not present, and you don't know where they are. So the first one describes high noise levels, distractions, high mental demands, lowered autonomy, which of course decreases productivity and satisfaction. And the lower one describes more absence from the office and worsened interpersonal relations. Okay, so it can really get this bad. However, the question, is it this bad for all cases, for all organizations? Now, which office type do you prefer was posed in a questionnaire posed at 10 different case sites. So here are the different cases. And in the worst case, only 13% prefer the AFO before other office types. And in the best case, 92% the AFO. So it's kind of huge difference here. And this is very intriguing. How can the concept be so popular in some cases up here, while so unpopular in other cases? Now the area is quite complex, and it has a lot of underlying factors. And today we're going to look at a few of the factors. We're going to look at office type before relocation, and some work tasks, and how the design and implementation process was conducted. No. And to find this out, we performed bivariate comparisons using chi-square test and Spearman's non-parametric correlation. And the gender and age correlations were checked for. And yeah, so do you think office type before relocation predicts preference for the AFO? Some of you nods, some of you say no, all right. Well, here you can see that the employees from the 10 cases, all of them, they were asked which office type have you occupied before relocation? And the results show that employees coming from open plan offices prefer the AFO to a larger extent than employees coming from cell offices. The cases I have studied in more detail, of these 10 cases, I've studied 4 of them in more detail, and they have mostly come from open plan offices. But I've been able to compare the open plan offices, the pre-relocation open plan and the post-relocation AFO. And one of the cases you can see here, it's an IT service and support provider. And the blue bars are the results from the pre-relocation open plan office, and the yellow bars are the post-relocation AFOs. And as you can see here, almost all bars improves, all factors improve. Especially you can see the aesthetics improves quite a lot. Amount of light, visual comfort, airflow, noise levels, it increases, but not significantly. Another case, the same open plan office before, and the follow-up after relocation in the AFO. And here you can see the air quality, aesthetics once again, and all possibility, the possibility of privacy actually decreases, but auditory privacy increases. And I should have pointed that out before here, where possibility of privacy actually increases here, which is quite interesting. So, sorry here. Perhaps it's not that strange that people coming from open plan offices actually enjoy the change more than open plan, than cell office occupiers, because they're coming from a work environment where you are already exposed to reduced privacy and more noise. And now there are suddenly breakout spaces that you can go to and find some privacy actually, and different speech zones. And the employees coming from cell offices, they are more used to having their own space that they perceive as their own all the time. And and in the AFO, they're actually reduced to reduced privacy and territoriality. Okay. Now, in the post-relocation questionnaire, to all 10 cases, we also asked about cognitive work demands and tasks. And here are the significant results. And as you can see, the employees who performed concentration demanding tasks, spoke on the phone or generated text, prefer to sit in other office types than the AFO. And on the contrary, if employees performed innovation demanding tasks or needed to learn and search for information, they prefer the AFO before other office types. And yeah, what are bosses and management? What do they do? Yeah, sorry. No, they, as you can see, they're more, the second one, or the innovation and learning, is more outgoing. You're more outgoing than being in your bubble. We asked in the questionnaire if employees performed secrecy tasks. And that was actually not even significant. So some people that perform secrecy tasks actually enjoy sitting in the AFO. So that's interesting. We also asked about which office type they had preferred before the relocation. And the results showed that if you prefer the AFO before relocation, you were also more likely to prefer the AFO after relocation. So even before you had even tried it out. So, and of the employees who prefer the other office type before relocation, a fifth of them changed their mind after relocation and started enjoying the AFO. On the contrary, if you prefer the AFO before relocation, there were only 5% changing their minds and started disliking the AFO. So you are more likely to be positively, more positive after relocation. And I want you to observe the strong correlation coefficient here, 0.58, and you compare the other ones, they're quite low in comparison. So from this perspective, I think the cognitive demands and tasks, they have some impact on satisfaction and preference. However, perhaps not to the same extent as some people may assume. The preference before relocation might show more about perhaps the planning process or perhaps other preconditions that are of more importance for the preference. And the cases, out of the 10 cases, we compared 4 of them, and the 2 highest preference, with the highest preference for the AFO, they were the 2 cases that had involved employees even before they had decided on which office concept they were going to implement. And the employees actually took part in the decision-making of office type. They were all part of the needs and activity analysis, and they also participated on deciding policies and rules, which was clearly communicated. And as you can also see, they had more time in the planning than the cases that were less satisfied. And one of the cases they were most happy about their office was the IT and telecom support providers. And how did their process look like? I studied them for 2.5 years during the whole process. And they conducted heaps of methods and activities that supported supported the analysis of the existing work processes. And they involved employees and facilitated interaction within the company. And the employees could, during the activities, express their office types preference, their objections, and rather than the decision being forced on them. And many of the methods also encourage ideation and considering different solutions and share thoughts and spur spontaneous initiatives. And as one employee expressed himself, nothing was left to chance. As a company, they took the process very seriously. Okay, so I also asked in interviews with all the employees, or not all, it was 50 employees in this company, and I interviewed 45 of them, so almost all. And I asked them what did they consider being the most important reason for the success of the outcomes, or the failure if they thought it was a failure, and only 3 persons thought it was a failure, the outcomes. So they perceived the primary objective of change to improve their well-being. They found that the objectives were meaningful and beneficial to them, not to reduce cost, which is often a reason why you implement it. Considerate financial and time resources in the beginning of the process, and a thorough work analysis that facilitated customization of the future office setting, to the objectives and anticipated future work processes. Employee participation. They also did not only focus on the physical change, but also the organizational and social change. And regarding this employee participation, we could actually see a significant correlation between employee empowerment in the process and environmental satisfaction and perceived performance. Yes. They also discussed rules in this for the social change, and although they did not decide on more than 5 rules, they only formalized 5 rules, but during the process they actually addressed how to act in this office and trying to agree on rules, and that created a unified understanding on how to comply with the rules. And that also made them very secure on how to act in the office. For example, they knew if it was okay to use the same workstation in consecutive days, and that is actually not decided by the office concept itself. It's something up for each organization to decide. Transparent information flow, management commitment, and external competence was other comments or were highlighted. They also highlighted some organizational factors, like procedures connected to their business type, like they were not so dependent on papers, and it was also about their culture, their power relations, and they had a very flat hierarchy. This is a very representative picture of the company. It was not only the executive director that took the first digging step for the whole new office, but actually all the employees were part of that. So this is an overview of factors that may contribute to the overall outcomes of AFOs. And this is what my thesis is going to be about. And the primarily title is Designing Flexible Office Work Environments, Planning Process and Outcomes. And the primary conclusions of the thesis is that contributors for positive or negative overall outcomes like environmental satisfaction, health, and performance It's actually the combination of different process factors, the internal and external organizational context, and the office setting that provides different working conditions, like communication, mental work conditions, autonomy, privacy, and territoriality, and so on. And the process factors and this model is actually has been sent into applied ergonomics and accepted, so it will be published in any second now. So you can find it soon on the internet. All right, so that is how I'm gonna end. Yes. Any questions?
Questions? No? Okay, we have one. Yeah.
Yes, there is. You think I should remember it? Well, you can just look for my surname, Rolfö, and you will find it, because it's a unique name.
I think I will take it together. So 40 minutes or, yeah. Okay. Yes.
I wondered if you have asked the people in your survey to bring a picture from their own home. Do you think the personality type of the persons would sort of reflect the things they prefer? Having a very personal home or a very sterile home?
There has been research going on for personality type. I know that there are like 6 different personality types, and this is by Sedig et al. And he found that only one was significant of all these 6, and it was not what you thought. It was not if you were being an extrovert or introvert. That had nothing to do with it. What was significant was, I don't remember what it was called, but how nice you are, because you couldn't say, some people can't say no if people approach you all the time. Yeah, so that was the reason. Otherwise, they couldn't see anything. All right. Yeah.
I hope we are a little over time, but I hope you will have time to sit and listen to Kersti. She has actually 2 presentations, but she will take them together. So we have 40 minutes now with Kersti.
Oh my gosh, how will you start? My name is Kersti Loren. I work at the Swedish Work Environment Authority, and I had 2 presentations for the NES conference, and I have put them together, so they are not 40 minutes, I hope, but they are not 20 either. And I'm glad that we had some kind of mini conference here, so that we could get here with good spirits. I think, yeah. My speak will be about this: from women's work environment to gender conscious work environment management. About the importance of gender equality in inspection activities. So I'm an inspector, and I'm also an ergonomist. And now let's see if this one works. No, it doesn't. So maybe that one. No. Ah, yeah. And this is short what I'm going to speak about. The assignments of women's work environment that we got from the Swedish government. The lessons learned. And something about how to do this. Short. And then my other presentation, which was the survey for my master's degree. So that's what I'm going to speak about. And now let's see. Yay. No, I went back. Okay. So a short description of the background. We got a commission from the Swedish government in 2011 because they saw that they wanted us to prevent exclusion of women from working life due to factors in the work environment. That's what they've seen. Women are had more sick leave than men. They wanted us to see the state of knowledge. They wanted us to develop methods to look at this, and that was mainly musculoskeletal disorders back at that time. We should train inspectors, we should perform inspections, communicate all this out to all the people who wanted to hear about it and them who didn't want to hear about it as well. And we should cooperate with other actors. This is the, what I say, what it looks like in 2016. And as you can see, now let's see that one. No, yes. There are more women than men who had sick leave, and the percentage of women 2016 was due to psychosocial problems, and the second most common is musculoskeletal disorders. And for men, the bigger percentage is for musculoskeletal disorders, and the second biggest is for psychosocial disorders. But still, the N here is 7,000, so there's much more women, both for musculoskeletal disorders and for psychosocial disorders. I think I will, well, this is the Swedish insurance organization Försäkringskassan. That's they regularly and the segregated figures on about sick leaves, and these are for women-dominated work, for men's dominated work, which you can see here, healthcare and care, and we have transport and building, and here we have mixed, and that's hotel, finance, and, well, let's say education. We wanted to have reports, so this is one of them, and this one is available in English on our website av.se, and it's called Physical Load, Gender and Health, and it answered this question: why do women in a larger extent than men suffer from MSDs? And we got an answer. They built a model. Now let's see. It starts down at the bottom. In Sweden, men and women don't have the same jobs. They have different jobs and they don't do the same things. But if they have the same job, they do different tasks. But if they have the same job, they do the same tasks, the tasks give different loads. If, for instance, they have the same jobs, the same tasks, the same loads, they get different physiological effects, of course. And if they have the same jobs, same tasks, same loads, same effects, there's still differences because the psychological effects will be different due to gender roles and traditions. And if we get sick, and we get the same treatment. No, we do the same. we still get different treatments from the healthcare. And there are different, you can divide this into different loads, individual aspects, organizational aspects, and aspects from society. And this is what what the researchers looked on deeper. So you can say the summary of that research was that men and women have different tasks in the same occupations, but that's an essential explanation for differences in work-related musculoskeletal disorders between men and women. And that has to do with work organization and allocation of work. And men and women have different workloads on the same task, and that's an important explanation for differences in work-related musculoskeletal disorders between men and women. And that has to do with working tools, ergonomics, and is put on the individual. And that men and women have different physiological response despite the same workload. And that they saw was not to any particular extent explanation to differences in prevalence of work-related musculoskeletal disorders between men and women. And that has to do with biology to the individual. Yeah, well, external load in this case, but I guess it has to do with the internal load as well, of course. And especially what you were speaking about earlier. Yeah. We should use assessment methods, and we were to develop methods, the government said, but we didn't. We imported methods. So these are a few of the ones that we have used. It's the, oh, sorry. Whoops. It's the HARM from Holland. It's the PTI that has to do with patient transfer from Finland. The tilt thermometer from Holland, also patient transfer. And then the old KIM methods. And then we also developed one, well, tips and tricks from the authority. So we trained our inspectors in these methods. We asked them to use them out at the employers, and we asked them also to try to train the employers, or at least to tip them about these assessment methods. I think I will go on like this. Oh, yeah. One of the most important or most common demands were about knowledge and skills. And it was especially by patient transfers. And we saw, if we compared the special or the where women most work and where men most work for forklift drivers, that forklift drivers, they have an obligation to have an education. And when they have the education, they get their driver's license. And when they have the driver's license, they get permission from their employer to drive the employer's forklifts. But when we looked at the patient handling, there is more or less, unfortunately in Sweden, as I guess in New Zealand, there's a lack of people who work in this area. And therefore, more or less, you can take someone who wants a job and they don't know anything about patients at all. They don't know anything about patient transfers, and they can start work tomorrow. And we think that that is a very it's not okay. And we have asked the what you say the parts, or the help me here. Yeah, the management, but together with the union. Yes. Yeah, thank you. The social partners, to come up with some solution to this, that they will get come together and say, okay, to make patient transfer, you should know this and you should know that, and it will take this long, and come together. And still they haven't done that. And we keep trying. We keep talking to them. We also did a supervision of female-coded and male-coded work in municipalities, and that was in 2013. So we were in 65 municipalities with different types of inhabitants, or different number of inhabitants. We did parallel inspections, 2 operations in the same municipality, and we did have a gender perspective in that one. That was unique. We haven't done that before. We had 70 inspectors of our 250 participating, and they were 2. And we put that into a internal gender perspective, and that was interesting, because we saw that the women inspectors took more, they were more driving than the male inspectors. So that was interesting. We made 900 inspections, and we evaluated that as well. So what we saw at the managers, if we compare, in the social home care, they had low degree of self-monitoring and job decision latitude. And in the technical services, they had a reasonable degree of self-monitoring. You can read by yourselves. Difficult to manage the high workload. Can manage high workload. They were almost always stressed. The employees was sometimes stressed at the technical services. What they said at the social home care was that they took their pauses directly when they started out in the morning, because otherwise they wouldn't have time to take them. And that's true. This was about the employees. And the managers then. 73% of the managers had more than 30 employees to have under them. And in the technical services, there were 10% of the managers that had more than 30 employees. And the managers were highly stressed, and in the technical services, they were stressed. So, and this led us to see that if the managers in the social home care are to help their employees with, for instance, risk assessments, they must have time for that. And if they are so highly stressed, there is no time. They have other things to do than to look at risk assessments, for instance. I was thinking that we should have a look at film now. And then let's see if I manage. Was it just a double click here? Yeah. And is there? And it's
Hello, this is a film created by the Swedish OHS Authorities. In 2011, we received a government assignment to investigate whether we become more affected by work-related illnesses than men. When we began to analyze this, we discovered that a gender perspective of the work environment is necessary to get answers. This film will tell you about the results of this work and show how the gender perspective of the work environment can prevent among them large working of women and to be a safe, reinforced gender working environment. We hope that those of you who are interested in and work with work environment will be inspired to see how this area can benefit from gender perspective.
If we use two methods in our work with investigating the differences and relations in various women's working environments. One of the methods entails the comparison between two listed organizations, that is, two workplaces with the same economy. The other method we use was our researchers. They reflect another workplace and these are only differences between working environments. To show you how this works, we shall now begin with the questions about what is the most common and understood changes in the work environment in Norway.
At Swedish OHS, there is a lot to do. They show that each of the very well. There are Ulla, Kirsten, Mark, and Jakob. They have boxes in each position, carry, push, and grab. On the conveyor belts, fish are handling manually the briefcase and tools. The actions are repeated without a break. The movements are in the muscle memory, and the work happens almost by itself. Out in the loading dock, other actions occur. Count fish, loading trucks, lifting heavy heavy. Those who drive the forklift trucks have been trained to reduce the strain of physical loads, sometimes just passing down fish. Some are probably equipped to show no one lifts the body, all translated to strong.
Fish processing industry has a workforce consisting of mostly men, but which are different things and therefore subject to different types of risks. The men are well represented in physical loads and some obvious but preventive risks become apart. It is mainly work tempo and in situations of strength and invincibility that cause physical work impacts. Among the majority of women performing the work, the physical strains on women are lighter, whereas the aging is not given as much attention and as much systematic development. It is therefore a possibility of variation and recovery between females and males employment. Several people in contact working over time have difficulties that make or cannot work closely to work environment. In growing up, several will be affected by that, and, in the worst case scenario, some are physically supported.
Maybe this could be changed by highlighting how gender is given its influence at our workplace. If we require greater respect, which meant the inconvenience of rotating, and women's wrists and shoulders have an opportunity to recover if they roll forwards and moving trucks instead. Muscle memory is perhaps not trained as fast, and some hesitation times mean that the work task will be required. Every staff member will need to learn several things, but maybe we would feel more secure knowing that the environment will last right through their working life. Could tools and equipment be used to reduce physical strain for everyone? What would happen on the loading dock if men who work there began to question when one's expected to be strong? What would happen if the employer encouraged employees to start talking about things? Would the expectations on the man to be risk-taking drop? If the employer's
let's see. Yeah, that's one. And then maybe that. No, there's these. Yeah, that. Well, as you could hear, no. Ah! Yes, you can still hear. Where do I get this one then? Now you have to help me. Yeah, now we will hear Mats. We don't want to hear Mats. So as you can hear, there are several films in English. So we can reduce Mats then. So thank you. As you can hear, there are a few films in English which you can use. And this one that we looked at is approximately 10 minutes. There are more films in Swedish, of course, and there's not the best one, but the shortest one is 4 minutes. And it's very, very easy to use when you should talk to people about these issues. This is what we came to in 2016. So we have worked with these issues since 2011, 2012. We started out with the inspections, and well, we have worked with this issue. And 2016, we got up with these 12 questions that we use at our inspections. They are also available at our website. I'm not sure that they are available in English, but if you want them in English, you can contact me. And there are especially 3 questions, whereas 2 are stressed here, and the third one comes on in the next slide. And this is not 12 questions to use from 1 to 12, but there are 12 questions to use to start a dialogue with the employer. And you can choose 1 or 2 of them to just get started. So the 3 that we almost always use is to start with, how many women and how many men work here, respectively, and which tasks do they perform, so that we know and get the employer on the track, that thinking about, do they do the same? Do they do different? And why is that so? And then we have questions about the distribution in management positions. And to what extent can employees govern their working pace, or if they can do that themselves? And if there are differences between men and women? And if there are working tasks that you're bound to one certain station, and if there are differences? We have seen that there is quite common that there are differences, that women are more bound to one workstation. And as they said in the film, women also, to a larger extent, work with repetitive work. And then a question about, are there some machines or workstations that are used more by women and others that are used more by men? And why is that so? And if they have safe equipment, we have been speaking about that as well today. Working clothes, tools, machinery, if they are individually adapted for women and men. It's common that the gloves are too big for women. And how do they know that? How do they investigate it? And then a question about changing rooms and toilets, if that's equally distributed, or if you have a workplace that are only women working, is it possible for men to change clothes anywhere? And how the accident statistics look when you divide them. And the third question, the 2 ones I stressed at the first slide, and this: how does work-related sick leave look when you divide them into women and men? That's the third one we commonly use. And then the two lasts. How do musculoskeletal disorder look when divided into women and men? They often don't know that really. And then if they have some staff survey, if they see differences in how women and men respectively experience stress, threats and violence, harassment, and support. And if they have noted some differences, if they have thought about it, and if they have made something about it. We have a lot, we use these a lot. I should say in almost every inspection, because of the 3 questions that are so easy to use. And sometimes you dig deeper and sometimes you don't. I think we have been discussing success factors today in almost every presentation. And this one about top-down support for bottom-up change. That's important in all the issues today, I think. And that you have clear instructions what to do and that you follow up. And steering, planning, and follow up again. That you have a competence and that you have a toolbox to use. At the Swedish Work Environment Authority, we have also in this project made a toolbox, and it's not only the 12 questions, there are many things that we can use. And that you have to be sustainable. It takes time to change. So we try to follow up, and hang on to talk about the gender perspective in the work environment management. And now to my small survey. I wanted to know, 2016 was the last time that we had like speaking about the gender perspective in the systematic work management as an activity we did do only 2 weeks around 8th of March, as you very well know what day that is. And when we tried to inform and inspire, what did the employer do? Because that was something that we did not write demands about. Yeah. And the aim of this study was to investigate whether they took any measures after the work environment inspector had been there in a regular on a regular inspection, and they got demands or executive orders on other things, but not on just on this thing. But what did they do? And I initiated with a survey that I sent an email with a survey to 517 employers who had a visit in this activity. And then I interviewed 13 of them. And I should say that 113 answered this survey, so 20% more or less. And what did they do then? Some of them had reviewed their gender equality plan. And quite a few had discussed this matter. What does it mean to us to have a gender perspective at some kind of a job meeting? And quite a few of them had watched some of the movies that we have on our website. As you saw one of them. And some changed the division of labor between men and women. And they were, quite a few of them also spoke about they wanted more job rotation. and they wanted more men and women to be able to do each other's work so that they wouldn't be so vulnerable if someone got sick or something like that. And the result of this one was that the employer thought that the question was relevant. They thought that it was relevant to their workplace. They appreciated the information. They thought it was interesting. They were inspired by the work environment inspector. But the most important preconditions for any activity to take place was that they have had it planned already before the inspector came. So, what impact did we have anyway? It was very common that they had something planned. They have had a meeting planned, and then they put all that inspiration and information they got into that meeting, and then they had something. They had more knowledge, and they had something to speak about, but it was planned before. So I think that we have to go to the last one. That when we write demands, we speak not only about employees, but about women and men on the workplace. Because when I think employee, I have a picture of someone. And when some of you think employee, you have another picture. So I guess if we write women and men, you have a wider picture in your head as an employer. And I had 1 minute. And the 3 wise words for gender conscious work environment management, that's to visualize, how does it look, compare between, and then reflect on what does it mean to us, what does it mean to me. And before we act, we have to reflect. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Any questions? Yes. Jakob.
I like the presentation a lot. You're speaking a lot about organizational and cultural things which have to change, but is Sweden also maybe on the way back to different limit values and guidelines for men and women working with men and women? In the old days, there were differences.
Yeah, there were differences, and now we don't have them in Sweden. No. And I guess that comes from your centimeters in the back. And I was very interested in that, what you presented, because I thought, what does this mean? Of course, you always have to have the risk evaluation before. And that, I think that's the key. But you have to see, if you say women and men, you have to make the risk evaluation on women and men, but you shouldn't divide them, because there are larger similarities in the gender than between the genders. So.
Of course, there is a gender difference due to physiology and hormones and things like that, but it's also a matter of size, which the erector spinae movement arm shows. So actually, there's a confounder in the guidelines, or the way you should have the guidelines, because it's not only a matter of gender. It's also that the small, weak men are in the group of women.
Yeah.
And it's not a question of being a man or a woman in that case solely.
Yeah, and that's a hard one, because you have to see that you have to think about men and women and employers or employees And you also have to start with the risk evaluation. And you have to see that men are the norm. So that is the question, I think. And I'm very interested in what you spoke about this morning, because I thought, how do we get someone to get this going? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions?
I would like to ask you about these numbers about the illness. Was it reported illnesses to Försäkringskassan, or was it recognized work injuries?
That was reported.
Reported.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask about if you are in a social care or hospitals or things like that, how high up in the hierarchy do you have to go to really meet the right people to be able to talk about the problems you have presented, like the difference between men and women, and how many employees they are supposed to manage, those questions. On what level do you discuss them to making improvement? What is your experience?
When we look at that, when we were in the municipalities, that was home care. But anyway, we discussed that with the highest level in the municipality, and then we had some impact. But usually, when we write our demands and send them to the highest level, they go by next post down to the manager of that particular place that we have been. And I think that's not a success factor. It should stay up here.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirsten.
Thank you.
And thank you all the speakers here today. Thank you for coming to Iceland. Thank you for being here with us today in this mini conference. I hope you will enjoy Iceland, even though it rains a little bit. Og fyrir ykkur hinn, kæra þakki fyrir þáttökuna, og ég bara vona innilega að Vinnueftirlitið og Vinnís haldi áfram svona samstarfi. Það þarf ekki annað til heldur